The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the creaking of wood as two men hammered together a gallows in the middle of the dusty town square. Lanterns swung in the cool night breeze, throwing long, shifting shadows against the sheriff's office and the saloon across the street. Every strike of the hammer seemed to echo with cruel finality, as though announcing to the entire town, someone would die at dawn. Behind the iron bars of the sheriff's cell sat a young woman, no more than 20, her wrists chained and her dress torn from days of rough handling. Her face was pale but defiant, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights and hidden tears. She leaned her head against the cold wall, listening to the sounds of her own execution being built, plank by plank. The townsfolk whispered outside, unable to keep their curiosity buried. They say she killed a man, one voice murmured. Another hissed. No, she betrayed the sheriff himself. That's why there's no mercy for her. No one knew the truth, or perhaps no one cared to. To the people of this small frontier town, justice was swift, harsh, and rarely questioned. And for this young woman, dawn meant death. Sheriff McGraw, a broad man with a bristling mustache and eyes like steel, checked the lock on her cell. Enjoy your last night, girl, he muttered coldly, the smell of whiskey on his breath. By morning you'll swing and no one will shed a tear. He shut the door with a clang that seemed to echo like a verdict. In the saloon, men drank and gambled, but their laughter carried an uneasy edge. Talk of the condemned girl filled every corner. Some pitied her, others swore she deserved worse, yet over every whispered conversation another name hovered like a storm cloud, one that made even the toughest men lower their voices. The Black Rider. A gunslinger with no equal, a man whose reputation was built on duels and blood. They said, he rode with the wind at his back and death in his shadow. No lawman dared chase him, and no outlaw dared cross him. It was said that if he gave you his word, you lived. If he gave you his glare, you died, and now, whispers claimed he was coming to town. Why would he care about some girl? A drunk muttered. Maybe she's tied to him, another replied nervously. Maybe she's the reason he rides alone. No one knew the truth, but everyone feared what dawn might bring. Not just the hanging, but the possibility of seeing the Black Rider himself. Inside her cell, the girl pressed her hands together as though in prayer. Her voice trembled as she whispered to the darkness, Lord, if you still see me, give me strength, or give me peace. The clock ticked toward midnight. Outside, the gallows loomed like a monster waiting to swallow the sun. And somewhere in the distance, faint but certain, came the sound of hooves against the dirt road. Dawn was approaching, and with it, destiny. The girl's name was Clara Hayes. Before the chains, before the gallows, she had been known only as the quiet daughter of a rancher who had worked the land on the far edge of town. Clara had grown up with calloused hands from hauling water, tending cattle, and mending fences under the blazing western sun. Her mother had died when she was just a child, leaving Clara with little more than her father's stern guidance and the long, lonely fields. Despite hardship, there had always been a light in her, a warmth that softened her weathered life. She loved the sound of the wind rolling through the prairie grass, the whistle of the morning train in the distance, and the song she would hum while hanging laundry on the line. Neighbors often said she had a kindness in her eyes, a look that could melt even the hardest of men. But kindness was no shield in a land ruled by greed and power. Her father, Samuel Hayes, had borrowed money to keep their ranch alive after a long drought. The lender, none other than Sheriff McGraw, a man whose law badge was little more than a mask for his ambition. He lent money not out of generosity, but as a trap, waiting for the desperate to fail so he could take what they had left. When Samuel couldn't repay, McGraw came calling. Clara had answered the door that day, standing between the sheriff and her sick father. She remembered the sheriff's cold smile, the way his eyes had lingered on her a moment too long. You can't pay the debt, McGraw said flatly. Then, I'll take what I want instead, her father had argued, his voice breaking with rage. But the sickness had left him too weak. Clara refused to bow, refused to become a man's property simply because he held power. She slammed the door in the sheriff's face that evening, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. Within a week, her father was found dead, some claimed. It was illness, others whispered it was poison slipped into his drink. Clara, barely 20, was left alone to face the sheriff's vengeance. Not long after, a gunfight broke out in town. A man was killed, one of McGraw's deputies, and before Clara could even understand what had happened, she was accused. Witnesses claimed they saw her slip into the saloon, saw her near the dead man's table, saw her fleeing when the gun went off. In truth, she had only gone to buy supplies, but lies spread faster than the desert wind. The sheriff wasted no time. He dragged her through the dirt street in front of the town, shouting that she was guilty of murder and theft. He claimed she had tried to steal from his office, that she had shot his deputy when caught. No trial was needed. His word was law. By sundown, the gallows were ordered. The townsfolk, though uneasy, said nothing. Some pitied Clara, but none dared challenge McGraw. He was too powerful, too dangerous, and besides, what was one girl's life compared to the peace of the town? Now locked in her cell, Clara replayed every moment in her mind. She thought of her father's kind face, of how he used to call her his little dove. She thought of the sheriff's hungry eyes, and the smirk he had worn when he announced her fate. She also thought of a stranger, one who had passed through their ranch years ago, a dark rider with a reputation whispered even then. She had given him water for his horse, bread for his journey. He had looked at her with eyes that saw deeper than most, had tipped his hat and said, "You've got courage, girl, hold on to it." She never forgot that voice. She never forgot the way he had ridden off into the horizon like a shadow. And now, as the hours to dawn ticked away, Clara wondered if fate was cruel, or if it was secretly weaving something greater. For though she did not know it, the feared Gunslinger the whole town whispered about, the Black Rider himself, was the same man who had once looked into her eyes and seen courage. The sheriff thought her powerless. The town thought her doomed. But destiny had other plans. The town of Dry Creek had always been a place where fear ruled more than law. Sheriff McGraw's word was iron, and his deputies enforced it with the edge of a gun. Folks kept their heads down, paid their dues, and prayed trouble never came knocking on their door. But there was one name that made even McGraw's voice drop to a whisper: the Black Rider. He was a figure wrapped in myth as much as truth, a man whose presence turned campfire tales into trembling confessions. Some said he was the devil himself, born of smoke and shadow. Others swore he was once a soldier who deserted the war, carrying the ghosts of the men he killed wherever he went. To the townsfolk, he was less a man and more a storm, unpredictable, unstoppable, and terrifying. They said he never missed a shot, that he could draw his revolver faster than a rattlesnake strike, that he once faced 5 men in a duel and walked away without a scratch while the others bled out in the dust. Mothers told their children to behave or the Black Rider would come for them, and hardened outlaws who feared no sheriff would pale at the mere whisper of his name. What made him most feared wasn't just his skill with a gun, it was his code. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it carried the weight of judgment. If he swore protection, you were untouchable. If he swore vengeance, nothing on earth could save you. No badge could command him, no bounty could tempt him. He answered only to himself. And now rumors spread like wildfire. He was coming to Dry Creek. It began with the blacksmith's boy, who claimed he'd seen a lone rider crossing the canyon trail at dusk, his coat flapping like wings in the wind. The telegraph clerk swore a message had come from a neighboring town. 3 men dead, all bounty hunters, and the last words on their lips were, "He's heading south." By the time the whispers reached the saloon, it was no longer a rumor. It was a certainty. The Black Rider was coming. Inside the saloon, whiskey glasses rattled in uneasy hands. "Why would he ride here?" a man asked, voice tight. "Because of the girl," another muttered. "I heard she's his woman." "That can't be true," someone else snapped. "He ain't tied to nobody." But even as they argued, fear gnawed at their hearts. Because if it was true, if Clara Hayes meant something to the Black Rider, then McGraw's gallows weren't just an execution. They were a declaration of war. Sheriff McGraw paced his office, the weight of his pistol heavy on his hip. He was a man who feared no outlaw, no drifter, no thief. But the thought of the Black Rider made his jaw tighten. Years of power had taught him one truth. You could buy, threaten, or kill almost any man, but not this one. Still, McGraw smirked to himself, convincing his own pride. If he comes, he muttered, I'll put him in the ground like the rest. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Men like him survived by playing safe, by twisting rules and holding power. The Black Rider wasn't safe. He wasn't corruptible. He was a reminder that justice, real justice, still existed, even if it came at the end of a barrel. As midnight wore thin, the townsfolk prayed. Some prayed for Clara's soul. Others prayed the rider would stay far away. A few, bold or foolish, prayed to see him, for to witness the Black Rider was to see living legend. Out in the darkness, beyond town, hooves struck the dirt rhythmically. A lone stallion carried its rider steadily forward, his broad hat shadowing his eyes, his duster coat trailing behind like a cloak. He rode without hurry, without fear, every movement steady, calm, and deliberate. The night air seemed to hold its breath around him. Coyotes fell silent. Even the stars seemed to dim when he passed beneath them. His revolvers gleamed faintly in the moonlight, polished from countless draws, countless duels, countless deaths. The Black Rider was coming to Dry Creek, and whether it was for vengeance, for justice, or for something more personal, no one in that town would ever forget the dawn that followed. The clock tower struck 11, its solemn chime echoing through the deserted streets of Dry Creek. The gallows loomed in the town square, casting long, skeletal shadows under the pale glow of the lanterns. The air was cold and heavy, thick with unease. Inside the sheriff's office, Clara Hayes sat alone in her cell. The chains around her wrists clinked softly as she shifted, her back against the wall. She had stopped crying hours ago. Tears could no longer ease the weight pressing against her chest. Instead, her eyes stared blankly at the barred window above her, where she could just glimpse the stars. The sheriff's deputies played cards in the next room, their laughter too forced, too loud. Everyone in that building knew the truth. They weren't just guarding a condemned prisoner. They were waiting, dreading the possibility that the Black Rider might ride through the darkness before dawn. Sheriff McGraw himself sat at his desk, polishing his revolver with slow, deliberate movements. His whiskey glass sat untouched beside him, a rare sign of restraint. He wasn't drinking tonight, not when the most feared man in the West might soon be at his doorstep. But he would never admit his fear, not to his deputies, not to himself. You really think he'll come for her, Sheriff? One of the men asked nervously from the other room. McGraw's voice was cold, steady. He comes for me. He'll die like the rest. The men nodded, but none of them believed it. Clara closed her eyes, her thoughts drifting to her father. She remembered his gentle voice, the calluses on his hands, the way he used to tuck her hair behind her ear and say, "Little dove, the world's cruel, but you're stronger than you think." She had tried to be strong. She had tried to face her fate with dignity. But tonight, as the hours bled away, she was afraid. She whispered a prayer, her voice breaking. "Lord, if you see me, don't let me die alone." Outside, the town was restless. Lamps burned late in windows as men and women whispered over their tables. Some pitied Clara, some despised her, but all of them feared what might come with the morning. The Black Rider's name had crawled into every corner of Dry Creek. No one could sleep knowing he might ride through the streets at any moment. The saloon stayed open, though no music played. Men nursed their drinks in silence, guns strapped tight to their hips. The piano sat untouched, its keys collecting dust as if even music dared not disturb the tension in the air. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats, distant, slow, steady. They rolled through the desert night like a drumbeat of war, faint, but unmistakable. Conversations froze. Glasses were set down. The saloon door creaked open as men spilled into the street, squinting into the darkness. Sheriff McGraw heard it too. His hand tightened on his revolver, his knuckles white. He stood, crossed to the barred window and looked out toward the horizon. The hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the night wind. Perhaps it was nothing. A traveler, a mirage of fear. But Clara had heard it as well. She pressed herself against the bars of her cell, straining to see through the narrow slit of a window. Her heart pounded. She wanted to believe it was him, the stranger she had met years ago, the one who had told her to hold on to her courage. The night stretched on. Midnight passed. The deputies dozed in their chairs, their cards forgotten. McGraw never left his desk, his revolver always within reach. Clara sat in silence, her chains heavy against her skin, her eyes refusing to close. When dawn came, she would walk to the gallows. The rope would be tightened around her neck. The trapdoor would fall. But somewhere out there in the endless desert, a lone rider was making his way toward Dry Creek. His horse carried him tirelessly, each hoofbeat a promise, each mile a step, closer to destiny. And though no one in town could see him yet, the Black Rider was coming. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in pale streaks of gray and gold. Roosters crowed in the distance, though their call felt more like a dirge than a greeting. The gallows stood ready in the center of Dry Creek, its wooden frame casting a long shadow across the dusty street. By sunrise, the town had gathered. Men, women, even children lined the square, drawn by morbid curiosity. Some came to see justice served. Others came because they couldn't look away from the spectacle of death. Whispers floated through the crowd like restless spirits, every conversation circling back to two names, Clara Hayes and the Black Rider. Inside the sheriff's office, Clara's chains were unlocked. Her wrists bore red marks where the iron had bitten into her skin. Two deputies stood on either side of her, guns at their hips, their faces tight with unease. Sheriff McGraw himself watched from the doorway, his broad shoulders stiff, his revolver glinting in the morning light. "It's time," he said flatly. Clara's legs trembled as they forced her outside, but her eyes held steady. She refused to let the sheriff see her break. The townsfolk fell silent as she stepped into the open square, her simple dress faded from wear, her hair loose around her shoulders. Someone muttered, "Poor girl." But another snapped, "She deserves it." The voices blended together, swallowed by the heavy silence that followed. The gallows loomed above her, its rope swaying gently in the breeze like a vulture circling overhead. The deputies pushed her forward. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, her heart pounding louder than the crowd's whispers. At the base of the platform, Clara paused, her eyes lifted to the noose that awaited her, and for a moment the weight of her fate threatened to crush her. But then she remembered her father's voice, the strength he had always urged her to hold on to. She clenched her fists and climbed the steps with as much dignity as her shaking body could muster. The sheriff addressed the crowd, his voice carrying with authority. "Clara Hayes stands guilty of murder and theft. By the law of Dry Creek, she is to hang until dead. May this be a lesson to all who think they can defy justice." He gestured to the executioner, who tightened the noose around her neck. The coarse rope scratched her skin, the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Clara closed her eyes, whispering a final prayer. The crowd held its breath, and then a sound. Hoofbeats. Slow at first, then louder. Steady. Unstoppable. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. From the far end of the street, a dark figure appeared, mounted on a black stallion, a long duster coat trailing behind him. His hat cast a shadow over his face, but his very presence made the air grow colder. The townsfolk knew without being told. The Black Rider had come. The deputies stiffened, hands twitching toward their guns. Sheriff McGraw's jaw tightened, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. The rider urged his horse forward, each step deliberate, the sound of hooves echoing against the wooden buildings. He stopped just short of the gallows, his gaze fixed on Clara. For a moment the world seemed to hold still. He dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. His hand hovered near his revolver, though he did not draw. He didn't need to. His reputation was enough to silence the entire square. Sheriff McGraw's voice broke the silence, loud but strained. "This don't concern you, Ryder. The laws. Clear. She hangs today." The rider finally spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying across the square like thunder rolling over the plains. "You've got no law," he said, "only your greed." Gasps rippled through the crowd. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Clara. "She won't hang. Not today. Not ever." McGraw bristled, his hand gripping his revolver. "And who's to stop it? You?" The rider's eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. "She's mine. My bride." The words crashed over the crowd like a storm. Shock, disbelief, and awe rippled through the people. Clara's own eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. Bride? Was it true? Or was this his way of saving her? She didn't know, but hope sparked where none had been before. The deputies faltered, unsure. No one dared move. No one dared defy the Black Rider. Sheriff McGraw's hand hovered on his gun, but he hesitated. For the first time in years, doubt flickered in his heart. He had power over the town, but did he have power over legend? The square was silent, every eye watching, every breath held. The noose hung loose around Clara's neck, the gallows forgotten. Her chest tightened with shock, but also with something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. Sheriff McGraw's expression darkened. His lips curled into a sneer, though his eyes betrayed unease. "Bride?" he scoffed. "This girl is no one's bride. She's a thief, a killer. She belongs to the rope." The rider's voice cut through him like a blade. "She belongs to me. By word, by oath, by blood if it comes to it. You lay one more hand on her, and it'll be your last." A hush swept the crowd. Even McGraw's deputies shifted uncomfortably, their hands hovering near their guns but unwilling to draw. Everyone knew what it meant to cross the Black Rider. Death came quick and it came certain. Clara's heart pounded as she searched his eyes. Was this true? Was she really his bride? Or was he risking everything just to save her from the hangman's noose? She didn't know, but in that moment it didn't matter. He had come for her when no one else would. McGraw straightened, forcing a laugh that carried no humor. "You think your reputation scares me? This is my town, Ryder, my gallows, my law." He stepped forward, his hand tightening around his revolver. "And no man tells me who lives and who dies." The rider's gaze locked on him, unflinching. "You've mistaken cruelty for law, but your reign ends here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. For years, McGraw had ruled Dry Creek with an iron fist, his word final and his justice twisted. The people feared him, obeyed him, but none of them loved him. And now, in the face of the rider, the cracks in his power showed. Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" The rider glanced up at her, his expression softening, just for her. "Because I made a promise," he said simply. "A long time ago, when you gave me bread and water, I swore I'd return the kindness. A man doesn't break his word." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but not of despair. For the first time since her father's death, she felt seen, protected. McGraw snarled, "You don't take her from me. She's mine. She owes me a debt." The rider stepped closer, his boots grinding against the dirt, each step deliberate, echoing through the tense square. "She owes you nothing. You took her father's life, you stole her land, and now you try to steal her freedom. Your debt is to her." The sheriff's face reddened with fury. His pride couldn't stomach being challenged in front of his town. Not by the one man he secretly feared. "Draw," McGraw hissed, his hand twitching toward his revolver. The rider didn't move. His hand rested near his holster, but his voice remained calm, steady as stone. "You sure you want that, Sheriff? Because you know how this ends." The crowd held its breath. Men leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable. Mothers pulled their children close, shielding their eyes. The deputies stood frozen, unsure whether to defend their sheriff or save themselves. Finally, McGraw spat into the dirt. "This isn't over, Ryder. You walk away with her now, but I'll hunt you, both of you. There ain't no running from me." The Ryder's eyes narrowed. "Then you'd best start digging your own grave, Sheriff, because if you come, I'll be waiting." With that, he climbed the steps of the gallows. His presence made the executioner stumble back in fear. With a flick of his knife, the rope around Clara's neck was cut, falling uselessly to the wooden floor. Gently, he took her hand, steadying her trembling body. The crowd gasped, but no one moved to stop him. He was legend, and legends did not answer to ordinary men. "Come," he said softly. Clara hesitated, still trembling, but she stepped forward. Her hand slipped into his, and for the first time she felt free. Together they descended the gallows, their footsteps echoing like a drumbeat of rebellion. McGraw's face twisted with rage, but he did not draw. Not yet. Not with the Riders, eyes fixed on him like a loaded gun. The Rider led Clara to his horse. He mounted first, then reached down and pulled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, clinging to the only lifeline she had left. As the stallion reared and turned, the Rider's voice thundered one last warning across the silent square. "She rides with me now. Any man who dares follow dies." No one moved. No one spoke. They could only watch as the Black Rider carried Clara away into the rising sun. The sun climbed higher over the desert as the Black Rider's stallion thundered across the open plains. Clara clung to him, her cheek pressed against the coarse fabric of his coat, her heart still racing from the gallows. The morning air stung her eyes, but it carried the sweet taste of freedom, a taste she thought she'd never know again. Behind them, Dry Creek shrank into the distance, the town still, reeling from what had just unfolded. For years, Sheriff McGraw had ruled by fear, but in a single dawn, the Rider had broken that spell. Whispers would spread through every saloon and campfire in the territory. The day the Black Rider claimed a condemned girl as his bride and stole her from the hangman's noose. Yet Clara knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. After several miles, the Rider slowed his horse, guiding it toward a rocky outcrop where the land dipped into a shallow canyon. He stopped, helping Clara down gently. Her legs wobbled beneath her, still weak from days, in chains. "You should rest," he said, his voice low but steady. Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide with questions. Why would you call me your bride? Was it just words to save me, or?" Her voice faltered, her heart pounding as she searched his shadowed face. The Rider paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then finally he turned to her. "Once," he said slowly, "I lived like other men. I had someone I loved. She was taken from me, by greed, by lawmen like McGraw who think the badge gives them the right to take what they want. Since then, I've walked alone. Until you." Clara's breath caught. "But I don't even know you." "You gave me kindness when you had nothing," he said. "Bread, water, a moment of humanity. You reminded me that not everything in this world is rotten. When I heard you were to hang, I couldn't let it happen, whether you call it debt, promise, or fate. You are mine to protect now, bride or not." Clara's chest tightened. He had spoken not as a man claiming possession, but as one binding himself to an oath. For the first time she saw past the legend, the outlaw, the gunfighter, and glimpsed the wounded man beneath. Her voice trembled. "Then, what happens now?" The Rider's eyes darkened. "Now McGraw will come. He won't let this go. He'll gather men, guns, maybe even the U.S. Marshal. He'll burn half the West if that's what it takes to hunt us down." Fear flickered in Clara's eyes, but alongside it grew determination. "Then I won't run from him," she whispered. "I've been running my whole life. Maybe it's time I stand and fight." A faint smile tugged at the Rider's lips, the kind that came not from joy but respect. "You've got your father's fire in you. Hold on to it, you'll need it." As the sun climbed, the rider saddled the stallion once more. Clara mounted behind him, no longer clinging in desperation, but with newfound resolve. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this much. She was no longer alone. Back in Dry Creek, Sheriff McGraw stood at the gallows, his pride shattered, his authority questioned. The rope swayed idly in the morning breeze, the symbol of his power now nothing but a useless cord. The townsfolk whispered around him, no longer looking at him with the same fear as before. McGraw's jaw clenched, his fists trembling with rage. He made me a fool, he growled, in front of my own town. One of his deputies shifted uneasily. Sheriff, maybe best to let it go. He's the rider. No one crosses him and lives. McGraw's glare could have burned steel. Then I'll be the first. Mark my words, he won't die easy, but he will die. And when I'm done, I'll drag that girl back here and finish what I started. The deputy paled but said nothing. As McGraw stormed back into his office, the town of Dry Creek felt a strange stirring. Fear, yes, but also hope. Perhaps the rider's defiance had planted a seed of rebellion. Perhaps McGraw's grip was weakening. But one thing was certain, this was not the end of Clara's story. She had escaped death, but her true fight had only just begun. Out on the open trail, riding into the vast unknown, Clara clutched the rider's coat tightly. Her eyes narrowed with quiet determination. She was no longer just a girl marked for the noose. She was the bride of the Black Rider, bound by fate to a man both feared and legendary. And together they were heading toward a storm that would shake the West to its very core.